Enactus National Competition is an annual event where student groups from some of India's top academic institutions present the work they have done as social entrepreneurs to help communities. The event is supported by the biggest companies across the world to help drive the message of positive change and action to students. The latest edition of the event held recently in Delhi hosted a panel discussion in which the focus was on the future of youth in India. The discussion was moderated by Mini Menon, executive editor of Bloomberg TV India, who started by asking about the road to recovery for the Indian markets.
You know, if I were to look at it from the lens of medium to long term, I don't think it could have been more brighter. Yeah, it is going to be India's century. There's no question about that. The center of gravity has moved from the developed world to the developing and emerging markets. And a large part of the consumption is going to come from developing and emerging markets. So there's no question about that. Within that context, India is certainly going to play a much bigger role than what it has played in the past. As far as immediate term is concerned, we still have to see the pickup. I think the government is taking all the possible right steps. But economy is not a switch that you put on and put off. It takes time before the virtuous cycle of economy starts kicking. And that's when you will see is more investments coming in, more consumption happening. And ideally, if we were to really get the benefit of demographic dividend, our growth rates have to move close to the double-digit rate.
Richard, I'm going to get you in here. You've got a great overview across industry because, at KPMG you deal with and advise many companies. The Indian economy has been likened to a jumbo jet, a very big jumbo jet which needs to be revved up and, has to go down the runway before a takeoff. Where are we? Are we about to take off? What sense are you getting?
We are at the time of history. Actually, I thought at one point of time when we hit the purple patch in 2000 to 2008 is when we hit the first purple patch. It happens once in your lifetime, but I was wrong. I think we are sitting at a time of history, and I think you youngsters who are sitting there are going to see India's century, because you're going to see a century where the world is slowing down, and India is possibly one of the very few countries which is growing, and also has the opportunity, forget about the growth, and with technology becoming the great disruptor that it is becoming, I think the power is in your hands. If I have to put another word, is youth the wind which will take India to its flight path, the jumbo jet, what you said. And I think it's the youth which will actually empower India to take us there. And with these new projects launched by the Prime Minister, a visionary Prime Minister that we have, where he talks about Make in India, Digital India, Skill India, these are all completely new challenges for a new India. And I think this is something that you are going to be fortunate to be part of. And as we go into the next few years, it's going to take time to get things moving. In my view, it will take at least 2 to 3 years. At least 2 to 3 years before we see, because investment has got to come back into the economy. And it's going to take 2 to 3 years. I think we need to have something which we have lost. And that is patience.
Sanjeev, you represent India's biggest FMCG company, one of the biggest hirers. So I'm going to ask you, when is investment going to be back? Because right now you are grappling with lower demand. Consumption has declined because of various factors. The monsoons are likely to be tough. How do you see the building blocks over the next couple of quarters and 1 or 2 years?
What we need is to move the growth rate upwards. It's not that we are shirking away from investment. In India, Hindustan Unilever here has been for 100 years. And we intend being here for several hundred years. So we keep investing. We keep developing the markets. So we have not gone away from hiring.
But what's gone wrong in the last couple of quarters? Because demand has kind of not picked up while sentiment has. And at the end of the day, I think for every sector to pick up, it has to, both hands have to clap, so to say.
See, one of the very discernible patterns that we have seen in recent quarters is the slowdown happening in rural. And if you look at rural consumption, what are the factors which drive rural consumption? One is the wage rate. Wage rate is also dependent on what is the quantum of investment which is put behind rural areas, whether it is the government schemes, whether it is the infrastructure development, whether industrialization is happening. The second important bit is the minimum support price.
Sure.
The minimum support price, which was earlier in the region of 9 to 10%, for paddy during the period 2010 to 2013 has now come down to low single digits. So that also reduces the quantum of money. That doesn't mean that the growth in rural area has gone away. It is there, but now it is more or less at the same rate as urban area, but it is much lesser considering the potential that exists in rural India.
From your point of view, how are you seeing India? I mean, a big company like Walmart, one of the biggest retailers in the world, regulatory environment has been tough, but is the potential of India now something that attracts companies like yours to really invest further?
We have been in the country for about 7 years. And like Sanjeev mentioned, we will be in the country for the next 100 years. That is the commitment Walmart has made to the country. One of the important things, and I'll cover this part, which is the ease of doing business. I think that's an important one for any foreign investor or any foreign retailer. And retail will drive growth in the future. What we have experienced, what I have personally experienced, is the focus on improving the ease of doing business on the part of the central government as well as each of the state governments. I can cite examples of states which are focusing on this very intensely. And another important issue is about graft-free and corruption-free environment. So we can experience it at the top levels. I can certainly vouch for it that at the top level we don't have any of those issues which come up, I think, which is a very big step forward for the country.
It all boils down, Siraj, to jobs. I think investments and then jobs are the focus of any government, and it should be, and for every corporate. How do you see the job market going forward? Because, to be fair, sentiment has changed. Yes, everything is, positive. India is always a great story in the medium to long term. But how do you see the job market opening up?
You look at the people sitting in the front rows here, they're all witnesses, participants, and beneficiaries of the economy opening up in the 90s, I would assume.
Yeah.
All of us have been part of that era of growth. And I foresee that we're probably stepping into the next era where I hope that the people sitting in the rows at the back will be moving forward in the years to come. So there is certainly opportunity, as all my fellow panelists have said, that we do see the economy opening up. Being from an agriculture company, I would sort of phrase it as saying that we've seen the scorching heat on the economy. We're now seeing the clouds coming up, and we are expecting the rains. And but for that, we need to have our fields ready, the seeds ready. So yes, the environment is right. We have to sow the right seeds and till the fields well to get the good harvest.
Okay, I'm going to talk to you, Anita, about sowing the seeds right, because I think somewhere every organization is also grappling with a big skill gap at every level as students come in. Do you think a lot more needs to be done to even skill the workforce that is coming into organizations?
I think what the government is trying to do is address things at a very structural intervention level. So we spoke about ease of doing business, about skilling India, the whole piece around urban infrastructure. Sure. And there definitely is a story out there at work which is very structural in nature. And any structural reform process is not going to bring in jobs tomorrow morning. It's going to take time to give that 10% growth rate. So as somebody mentioned, I think patience as a virtue needs to come back into the economy and into India. But having said that, I think even when you look at the jobscape today, what's interesting is the diversity of jobs. But also there is a great drive towards youngsters going out there and starting on their own. I think the entire startup wave is encouraging a whole spirit of entrepreneurship that's very, very different from maybe what was several years back, when most of us looked at very conventional routes to building a career.
We keep talking about the fact that India is sitting on a great demographic dividend. By 2020, average age will be 29. What has that change done to companies? I mean, how are you, A, viewing the talent pool, and B, how has that changed from within? Because I recently read an article on the first page about how many millionaires Lever has under 40. So I think it was quite tantalizing.
Okay, if we were to look at from various lenses, one is, of course, affluence. I was out of the country for nearly 2 decades. And during those 2 decades, 20% of Indians have come out of the poverty trap. It's been such a big change. Nearly 1% every year on an average. Yeah, so affluence is there. Awareness today, we know it, the reasons. The attitudes are very different. The access that people have to different means, be it communication, be it to goods and services, it's of a different order. So when a person is being groomed in this environment, his expectations are also different.
Sure.
Yeah? And if you go back to the history of organized industry, it started with the Industrial Revolution, which brought in scale. And scale brings in hierarchy. And when you had that kind of typical organization, and from where the organizations are evolving, I think some things clearly stand out. One is, as heads of the corporation or as senior managers, in the old days, we were expected to have all the answers. The days have moved on, and now what we are expected is to have the right questions. We recruit great guys, and we believe they would be having the right answers.
In the consultancy world, you're supposed to know more than the person who's sitting across the table. And given the fact that you're getting younger and younger over there, what does that put in terms of pressure on the young partners that you have or the young consultants that you have to really skill themselves? And what should the students over here take away if they want a great career?
I think maybe the older partners need to worry whether they are relevant, because the world is changing so fast. In fact, there is a UN report, which says that never before in the history of the world has there been so many young people in the system, and never again will there be so many young people coming into the workforce at the capacity at which it has come now. This is the 2014 report. And that means more jobs, but it also means more consumption, it means more lifestyle, it means more kind of services to that. So I think there is a big push of these young people coming in. And I think the young people challenge the very way of doing work. So they bring a completely new dimension to the work, the way it was being done earlier. So in fact, they are bringing the new way to work. Because they are using the latest technology available. They are much more empowered in the sense, they are much more knowledgeable because they have access to knowledge now, which is available on the click of a button.
When you grow, and Walmart has expanded slowly but steadily with 20 stores, you were telling me, you're also going into states beyond, in Madhya Pradesh, Telangana, Andhra. One of the big challenges companies have is really getting talent to go there, and the paucity of good talent over there. So how are you dealing with something like that? Because at the end of the day, talent is the most important thing that for any company needs.
I think one of the most important aspects in terms of being able to attract good talent is the culture of the organization. Because the first thing which any potential employee is looking at is what is the nature of the company, what is the kind of work environment, what kind of work ethos and culture that exists in the organization, and will he or she have a sense of pride in working for such an organization. So we emphasize the importance of culture, and I think the single most important factor for Walmart's success in the last 50 years is its culture. The respect for individual, service to the customers, striving for excellence and acting with integrity.
As a traditional agricultural company, what is your fight for talent, and what are the challenges that you face?
Agriculture, until a few years, agriculture and food, I would say to a certain extent, wasn't the most exciting places for people to work with. I mean, when I passed out of college, it was banking and Unilever and companies, more consumer good companies, which were sought after. But I think what's happening now is in the last 10 years, I would say, food and agriculture have come onto the center stage when the world certainly felt threatened that it may run out of food, and distribution of food, the quality of food, all those, as the health consciousness grew, people became more conscious of what they were eating. So I think there is a lot more science involved, there's a lot more selling involved, and those are areas which are attracting people. But more importantly, linking back to your questions on startup, I think a lot of startups are actually happening in the food space, and that's actually telling you that there is a growing interest in the food space because that is, particularly for economies which are growing, that's the first expression of prosperity when an economy grows. So more people are consuming more and better food, and that is where the opportunity is, both for enterprises, for companies, as well as people who are linking up or getting into startups.
For all the students over here, I'd like to point a very, very scary statistic that in India, 50% of the women fall off the workforce between the junior and middle level. So what did the organization do right for you, and what can organizations do to really ensure that women get an equal chance in the workforce?
So you're right that the life stage is very important, and it's not so much the top or when you start out, because at the entry level, I don't see any aspiration deficit among the young women of India. All of them are eager to get into the workforce. People are hiring, but what really happens is that at a certain stage in life, people do fall off. As you said, 50% fall off in the middle. And often enough, the corporate tends to blame it as a lack of aspiration, an aspiration deficit in the youngster. I really don't think that's the case. I think the whole case is about the person having to do a trade-off analysis or a cost-benefit analysis between remaining on the job and coping with the rest of life, as opposed to just giving up on it because they don't feel geared enough or supported enough, both by the organization and by the family ecosystem, to be able to make that transition. Because once they make those middle years transition, again, I think it's a level playing field in terms of reaching the top. So what's really critical is how do you support the women ecosystem through resource groups, through networks, and through mentoring at the crucial middle years to be able to get them to make the transition to the next level.
If talent is the biggest, competitive edge that you have, I think for companies to lose out on great talent just because they are up against a life stage hurdle is, I think, really sad, because you don't have enough talent to be able to afford that leaky pipeline. So from Lever's point of view, what are you doing at Hindustan Lever, and what are the lessons that you have learned, and what's the best way, and what is the advice that you would give a lot of the women students specifically over here on that?
As far as the quality of talent is concerned, there is no difference at all between men and women. In fact, today, if you look across the world, there are more women graduating from the top universities than men. And even my daughter just graduated from a very male-dominated kind of institution like MIT. Even there in the class of 2015, there were as many women as men. Yeah? So that is absolutely right. We have great talent in. And today, when we recruit our management trainees, there are more women than men. And yes, it is also true that somewhere in the age group of 30 to 40, we see a lot of women moving away from the careers. And we are absolutely clear that we don't want to lose any mothers, for instance. Yeah? In our office in Mumbai, head office, we have a fabulous creche. That creche is open to all men and women, and people bring their kids there. They can go and, whenever they want to look at their kid, they want to feed their kid, they can go over there. We've also started agile and flexible working. Yeah, just after first is we have extended the maternity holidays. It runs up to 6 months. Then the second is we have started very clearly, if you want to work from home, you can work from home. Today the technology aids you to do that. So that's the kind of flexibility we have brought in.
Richard, it's important to bring these issues to the mainstream, even on a conversation when you're talking about how the youth are transforming India, because that's one half of the youth, and I don't think we give it adequate emphasis. Most successful organizations which have allowed women to go up the ranks are actually gender-neutral organizations. So I think one of the things for any ambitious young girl over there is that, yeah, great, the organization's doing it, but I hope it doesn't mean that I will step back from my ambitions because I'm taking this option. So how are organizations dealing with that? How are you ensuring that a year or two of slowing pace does not mean that you lose out on the long run?
So actually in the consulting world, it is gender neutral. The way I look at it, when people raise this men-women issue, I don't see it as an issue because I think right across we treat it very equally. So what Now let's take a woman who goes into a family way and she takes off for 1 or 2 years from active work. Now, considering the way we grow and the way we evaluate people, that person can come back into the workforce and very quickly, in a matter of 3 to 4 years, catch up with, you can't expect to come back at the same level at which your male colleague who continued will continue, but you have the opportunity to come up, because in the consulting world, growth is dependent upon your performance, how you actually perform and what kind of responsibilities you take on. So I think we need to change the initial biases that we have,
Sure.
but you need to clap with both hands, I would say.
How do you bring the ethics issue to the individual level, and how important is that?
I believe that it is extremely important. And the way we, for instance, the kind of importance that we give it as an organization is that we have a chief ethics officer. And we have a global ethics program. We have ethics hotline where any one of the 4,000 employees working in different stores as well as home office can write to either the global ethics office or call on the ethics hotline and register a complaint about any issue relating to ethics. It has helped us tremendously to bring things under control and correct any wrong that may be happening in any part of the organization. So ethics has to be defined also not too narrowly, because complying with the laws of the country, for example, is an ethical issue and it's non-negotiable. Dealing with our women associates and women colleagues in the right manner and providing the right work environment, it's part of the ethical issue. And even the slightest level of what could be defined as sexual harassment is not tolerated at all and is acted upon very quickly.
Siraj, we're talking about how the youth is transforming India. What is your piece of advice to all the students over here? What is the one message you'd like to give them when they leave here, to ponder over, to not only be able to capture the opportunity that India offers, but really to grow with it? So in the right manner, through skills, through attitudes, whatever else, I mean, that you would prioritize.
Okay, so I'll still continue with what Krish said on ethics in response to your question. I think the responsibility that this generation has is to improve the image of business. We've inherited a society which has been socialist, and business has been seen as bad, and where profit making has been equated to profiteering. And that needs to change. And that can be changed when business becomes is perceived to be more ethical and socially conscious. And I think that's the opportunity this generation has, where business is no longer the preserve of a few families or a few advantaged classes. It is really individuals going out, charting out their destiny, but while they are doing it, my request to them would be that they carry a responsibility and should look at leaving behind that legacy of creating an environment where business is seen as good for the country, good for the economy, because that really will bring down the barriers. We talked about ease of doing business. I think most laws are put in place because there's a perception that the business is going to break them. And therefore, the higher the perception of business not being honest, the tougher the laws. And if we want the economy to open up, if we want the ease of doing business to happen, I think it's the responsibility of the business to prove and to convince the society that we are there for the good of the society. And I think this new generation, which is setting out in this space, carries that flag, and I'm hopeful that they will deliver.
And I think these are pieces of advice that each one of you should keep in mind as you step out into the real world and the workplace. Thank you all for joining us on this.